The economy isn't crashing, it's rotting in silence. You're not imagining it. Things are off. Your groceries cost 40% more than they did 5 years ago. Rent just hit an all-time high. Credit card debt is exploding past $1.37 trillion. And 1 in 5 Americans now relies on buy now, pay later, just to afford basic needs. We're not watching a collapse, we're watching a controlled demolition, engineered to keep the lights on while everything beneath your feet gives out. Corporate profits are up, but so are mass layoffs. Mortgage rates are falling, but no one's buying homes. The headlines say the consumer is strong, but 63% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, including nearly half of those earning 6 figures. Banks are limiting withdrawals. Small businesses can't access credit. And behind it all, public trust in the entire financial system is evaporating. This is not a recovery. It's a breakdown in disguise. And by the time the system admits it's broken, it'll already be too late for most. Here's what's really happening. The economy isn't collapsing. It's quietly being hollowed out by phantom growth. What most people don't understand right now is that this economy is not breaking down in the dramatic way it did in 2008, where you wake up one morning and banks are imploding on live television. No, what's happening in 2026 is far more dangerous because it's subtle. It's a slow hollowing out process. And the best way to describe it is that we are living through what economists are starting to call phantom growth, where the numbers say the economy is expanding, but the actual lived experience of normal people is getting worse every single month. GDP might be technically positive, the stock market might look like it's holding up, unemployment might still appear stable, but underneath that surface, the foundation is rotting. For example, real disposable income for the bottom half of Americans has barely moved when adjusted for inflation, even though the official data will tell you wages are rising. The problem is that wages are rising in nominal terms, but the cost of survival is rising faster. Shelter inflation remains one of the most stubborn categories, health insurance premiums are exploding, and food prices are still up over 20% compared to pre-pandemic levels. And here's something most people don't know. Nearly 60% of GDP growth since 2023 has been driven by upper-income consumption, meaning the economy is being propped up by the top 20%, while everyone else is quietly drowning. This is why luxury spending stays strong while Walmart shoppers are financing groceries with credit cards. In fact, credit card balances recently crossed $1.3 trillion, the highest in American history, and delinquency rates are rising fastest among middle-class households, not the poor. That's the breakdown point. It's not homelessness first. It's the collapse of the normal life tier. The people who used to feel stable are now skipping dentist visits, delaying car repairs, leaning on buy now, pay later just to afford basics. And that is not what a healthy economy looks like. That is what an empire looks like when the economic engine is still running, but the internal parts are grinding into dust. It's like a building that still has electricity, still has lights on, but the steel beams are quietly rusting out. That's where we are. The economy isn't crashing, it's eroding. And erosion is harder to notice until the floor suddenly gives way. The silent breakdown of the middle-class contract is accelerating faster than anyone realizes. One of the most terrifying things happening right now is that America's middle-class contract, the entire post-World War II, promise that if you worked hard, you could live a stable life, is quietly being dismantled in real time. Not through one single event, but through 1,000 tiny financial cuts. And most people don't see it until they suddenly realize they're working more than ever and still falling behind. This is why the economy feels broken even when the news says it's fine. Because what's breaking isn't GDP, it's the deal. It's the agreement between effort and reward, and the data is insane. Productivity in the United States has risen over 60% since the late 1970s, yet real wages for the median worker have barely risen at all. That gap didn't vanish, it was absorbed upward. And now we're reaching the end-stage consequence. Full-time work no longer guarantees stability. Over 40% of Americans now report having a side hustle, not for luxury, but for survival. Meanwhile, the cost of the 3 pillars of middle-class life: housing, healthcare, and education has risen so dramatically that they now function like private taxes. Housing alone is consuming over 35% of income for the average renter, and in many metro areas, it's over 50%. That's not sustainable. That's futile. And here's the part most people miss. The middle class isn't collapsing from unemployment, it's collapsing from overemployment. People have jobs, but those jobs are increasingly insecure, automated, underpaid, and stripped of benefits. More than half of new jobs added in the past year have been in low-wage service categories, while high-paying professional roles are shrinking under AI, restructuring, and corporate consolidation. The middle tier is being removed. That's what makes this era different. In past cycles, recessions were sharp, and then recoveries rebuilt the ladder. Now the ladder itself is disappearing. The middle class is being squeezed into two options: elite asset owners or paycheck-to-paycheck workers. And that transition doesn't feel like a crash. It feels like waking up and realizing your life costs 30% more than it used to, but your income didn't move. That's why people feel anxious even when the Dow hits records, because the economy is functioning like a machine that only rewards capital, not labor. And historically, when societies reach that point, the breakdown doesn't come from markets first. It comes from social fracture. The hidden debt spiral is becoming the economy's permanent life support system. The American economy is no longer being powered by income. It's being powered by debt. That's the quiet breakdown. We are no longer in a system where growth comes from rising productivity and real prosperity. We are in a system where growth comes from borrowing against the future just to survive the present. And this is why everything feels so unstable. Debt has become the oxygen mask keeping the economy conscious. Household debt is at record highs. Government debt is over $36 trillion. Corporate debt remains massive. But the real danger isn't just the number, it's the interest cost. The United States government is now spending over $1 trillion per year just servicing debt interest, which means we are approaching a world where interest becomes one of the largest federal expenses, larger than defense, larger than Medicare. That is late-stage empire math. And at the household level, the same trap is happening. Credit card interest rates are now averaging over 22%, which is basically legalized loan sharking. Auto loans are stretching to 7-year terms. Subprime delinquencies are rising. Student debt is still crushing an entire generation. And here's what people don't realize. This is not cyclical debt. This is structural. This is debt baked into the cost of living. People aren't borrowing for vacations, they're borrowing for groceries, rent, car insurance, electricity. And when an economy reaches the point where survival requires leverage, it becomes extremely fragile. Because all it takes is one disruption, a job loss, a medical emergency, a spike in energy prices, and the entire system starts snapping at the seams. That's why we're seeing more defaults, more bankruptcies, more quiet financial distress, even without an official recession. This is a debt depression hiding inside a GDP expansion. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. The economy isn't crashing. It's being kept alive artificially, like a patient with stable vitals only because the machines are doing the breathing. And the question is, what happens when the debt stops working? Retail is still open, but it's quietly turning into a mirage economy. You might not have noticed this if you're not looking closely, but the American retail landscape is quietly becoming a ghost town in slow motion. Not because all the stores are shuttering at once, that's the kind of collapse people expect. What's happening now is more sinister. The stores look like they're open. The lights are on, the shelves are stocked, but behind the scenes, the system is buckling. This is what I call the mirage economy. It's a retail sector that appears alive on the surface, but it's being held together by deepening losses, zombie businesses, and a level of desperation that should terrify everyone. As of Q1 2026, over 2,600 retail stores have already announced closures, and it's not just struggling chains. We're talking about giants. Macy's is closing 150 locations, Dollar Tree is pulling out of underperforming markets, and even Starbucks is exiting areas where theft and foot traffic no longer balance the bottom line. Meanwhile, retail bankruptcies are quietly mounting. In the first half of 2025, we saw more retail bankruptcies than in all of 2019. And this year, the pattern continues. Why? Because inflation didn't just make products more expensive, it broke the business model. People are not impulse buying anymore. Discretionary spending is falling through the floor. And while high-end retail is still doing fine thanks to the wealthiest Americans continuing to shop, the middle and working class, which historically fueled the majority of retail spending, is tapped out. Retail foot traffic is down in malls, down in strip centers, down in urban cores. And here's a stat most people don't know. Almost 1 in 3 small retail businesses in the U.S. reported in a recent NFIB survey that they couldn't pay their full rent in the last 90 days. That's not a healthy economy, that's silent collapse. And let's not forget the inventory side of the equation. Big box stores are sitting on unsold inventory, quietly cutting orders to suppliers and discounting just to keep things moving. But underneath that, margins are shrinking, earnings are missing, and Wall Street just keeps raising the bar to unrealistic heights. So what happens when the illusion breaks? What happens when retail can't keep up the appearance of normal anymore? Because what's coming isn't just empty shelves, it's entire neighborhoods losing their economic center. Once the stores go dark for good, those jobs don't come back. That tax revenue disappears, and then local economies begin to wither from the inside out. That's what people aren't seeing yet. But it's already happening slowly, one strip mall at a time. The strong consumer narrative is a lie built on fire and plastic. You've probably heard it repeated like gospel by every economist on TV. The American consumer is strong. But what if I told you that statement is now one of the most dangerous lies being sold to the public? Because here's the truth, the consumer isn't strong. The consumer is burning, quietly, slowly, behind a mountain of plastic. The only reason consumer spending has looked resilient over the past 2 years is because Americans are going deeper into debt to maintain the illusion of stability. As of January 2026, total credit card debt has reached a record-shattering $1.37 trillion. That's not just a number, that's a warning flare. And what's even more alarming is the pace. Credit card balances have grown faster in the last 12 months than in any period since the 1990s. And yet people are still spending. How? Because they don't have a choice. They're using debt to survive, not to splurge. When 63% of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck, including over 45% of those making more than $100,000 per year, that's not strength. That's desperation. And here's something no one is talking about. Buy now, pay later services like Klarna and Affirm have seen explosive growth, but not for big purchases. People are now financing toothpaste, groceries, dog food. As of late 2025, over 25% of all BNPL users reported missing at least one payment. That's not just bad budgeting, that's systemic strain. And while inflation has come down from its peak, it hasn't disappeared. Grocery prices are still up 26% since 2020. Rents are still elevated. And wage growth has already started to flatten. So we're in a situation now where people are spending more just to get less, while financial stress builds like a pressure cooker. But the Fed and the media keep pointing to spending as proof of recovery. As long as the cash register rings, they pretend it's fine. But they never ask where that money came from. And that's the lie. The strong consumer narrative isn't based on real savings or real income. It's propped up by a pile of flaming credit cards, expired stimulus fumes, and a banking system that will keep handing out just enough rope for the consumer to hang themselves. Eventually, defaults spike, confidence erodes. And then all the spending that looked so resilient disappears overnight. That's the quiet breakdown nobody wants to admit. The crash won't be loud, it'll be invisible until suddenly it isn't. The housing market isn't booming. It's mutating into a financial trap. At a glance, you might look at the housing market and think it's healthy just because prices are still high, but that's a trap. Because what's actually happening under the surface is that housing is no longer functioning as a shelter-first market. It's turned into a broken finance game, and the damage is rippling across generations. And here's what most people don't realize. Even though mortgage rates have cooled slightly to around 6% in early 2026, affordability hasn't returned. Why? Because prices haven't dropped, and in some cities they've actually climbed higher. According to Redfin, the median home price in the U.S. as of January 2026 is $412,000, and in high-demand metros like Austin, Nashville, and Miami, median prices are still hovering near their all-time peaks. The problem? Wages haven't kept up. The home price-to-income ratio is now higher than it was in 2007 before the crash. Let that sink in. And while that doesn't mean a crash is coming tomorrow, it does mean we're living in a distorted market that's slowly choking out the middle class. The average monthly mortgage payment for a new buyer is now over $2,800, not including insurance or taxes. That's more than double what it was just 4 years ago. Meanwhile, landlords are seizing the moment. Rent inflation might have slowed a bit on paper, but the structural changes are baked in. The national average rent is still up over 30% since 2020, and for millions, that means housing is now their single biggest source of financial stress. And the most shocking part? Over 80% of homes purchased in 2025 were not by first-time buyers. They were bought by investors, flippers, or people who already own property. The dream of home ownership is quietly dying, and we're being gaslit into thinking that's normal. Young people are being priced out indefinitely. Families are stretching budgets beyond safety just to lock in a home, only to find themselves house poor. And baby boomers are sitting on ultra-low mortgage rates, refusing to sell, which is freezing up inventory and keeping prices artificially inflated. It's not a housing boom, it's a hostage situation. The entire market is being distorted by decades of artificially low interest rates, Wall Street's entrance into single-family homes, and a shortage of political will to fix it. And as housing affordability collapses, so does upward mobility. We are witnessing the formation of a permanent renter class, not because people want to rent, but because they have no other choice. And once a society locks out its middle class from property ownership, the ripple effects are generational. The collapse of small business confidence is a slow-motion crisis no one is watching. People always talk about Main Street versus Wall Street, but here's the part they never tell you. Main Street is quietly bleeding out right now, and unless you run a small business or work for one, you probably haven't seen how severe it's gotten. As of Q1 2026, small business confidence as tracked by the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index is hovering near 48.5, one of the lowest readings in over a decade. That means business owners aren't just worried, they're pessimistic about the future. And here's the thing, small businesses aren't some fringe part of the economy. They represent nearly 44% of US GDP and employ about half the entire private workforce. So when this sector loses faith, it's not just a warning, it's a signal that the foundation of the real economy is cracking. And the cracks are everywhere. Supply chain delays may not be in the headlines anymore, but small businesses are still dealing with higher input costs, erratic deliveries, and inconsistent customer demand. Worse, the cost of capital has exploded. A small business loan that might have cost 5% interest in 2021 is now approaching 10 to 11%, if you can even get approved. And forget about revolving credit. Banks have dramatically tightened lending standards, with small business loan approval rates hitting record lows across major lenders. But what's truly devastating is the labor situation. It's not that there aren't workers, it's that small businesses can't afford to compete. Big corporations offer signing bonuses, stock options, remote work perks. Meanwhile, your local bakery or repair shop is just trying to keep the lights on. A recent Goldman Sachs survey found that 77% of small business owners say inflation has hurt their bottom line. And 63% say they are not confident they can continue operating beyond the next 12 months without changes to policy or consumer behavior. That's terrifying. Because when small businesses close, they don't just vanish. They leave behind hollowed-out towns, fewer jobs, less community resilience, and economic monocultures dominated by big-box chains and delivery apps. The economy doesn't crash in a moment. It breaks down when thousands of local shops, cafes, services, and tradespeople slowly disappear, one by one, quietly, until the soul of the economy is gone and all we're left with is a handful of corporations, higher prices, lower service, and a complete disconnect between economic growth and real human well-being. That's the small business collapse we're living through, and barely anyone's talking about it. Behind the corporate profits, a quiet efficiency crisis is gutting the workforce. Corporate America is still posting profits, and that's what keeps Wall Street happy. But what nobody's talking about is the deeper rot underneath those earnings reports. Because those profits aren't coming from healthy economic expansion. They're coming from extreme cost-cutting, financial engineering, and, most dangerously, systemic underemployment. What we're seeing right now is a quiet efficiency crisis where companies are doing more with less. Not because it's innovative, but because it's desperate. The labor force has been gutted by waves of automation, AI deployment, offshoring, and layoffs disguised as restructuring. And here's the truth. Many of the biggest employers in the US are no longer in the business of creating jobs, they're in the business of replacing them. In the past 12 months, white-collar layoffs have surged. We're talking about tech, finance, and even healthcare sectors slashing tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. Google, Meta, UPS, Amazon, Deloitte, Citibank, all announcing massive job cuts while simultaneously increasing stock buybacks. This isn't just about trimming the fat, it's about extracting the last possible drop of value from a shrinking workforce while projecting strong earnings to the market. And what's worse, the remaining employees are being crushed under unsustainable workloads. Productivity gains are often just burnout in disguise. Quiet quitting, stress leave, and mental health crises are at all-time highs across corporate sectors. But Wall Street doesn't care. They don't measure morale, they measure margins. And the margin game is brutal right now because inflation hasn't fully gone away. Input costs are still high, and consumer demand is weakening, which means the only lever CEOs can pull is payroll. And that's what makes this such a dangerous turning point. Because we're not just witnessing a labor market shift, we're witnessing a collapse in the social contract between worker and employer. Fewer benefits, fewer protections, more gig work. More 1,099 contractors. Even doctors and nurses are being replaced with contract labor in major hospital systems. This is no longer about recessions. This is about economic decoupling. Profits and people are no longer tied together. Corporations can win even as households lose. That's a toxic system. It creates a bifurcated society where stock prices rise while social stability deteriorates. And if you're wondering why the economy feels so wrong, even though the S&P 500 is flirting with all-time highs, it's because those profits are built on sand. Thin, fragile sand that collapses the moment there's no one left to lay off. Infrastructure is still standing, but it's quietly failing. One system at a time. On the surface, American infrastructure might look intact, the highways are open, the power is on, water still comes out of the tap. But underneath all that is a slow, systemic failure that nobody's preparing for. And what's terrifying is that it's not just a local issue, it's national. Bridges, electrical grids, transit systems, water lines, school buildings, all of it is aging past its intended lifespan, and the collapse isn't happening with explosions. It's happening with rust, cracks, outages, and silence. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives U.S. infrastructure a C- grade overall. That might not sound terrible, until you realize that nearly 43,000 bridges are considered structurally deficient, that 2.2 trillion gallons of treated water leak from aging pipes each year, and that the average public school building is over 50 years old. And the funding gap to even begin addressing this? Over $2.6 trillion through 2039. The 2021 infrastructure bill was a start, but it barely made a dent. Most of that money went to shovel-ready projects and broadband upgrades, while the core mechanical and physical systems, dams, freight rail, storm drainage, sewer networks continue to deteriorate. And here's the other problem: climate stress. America's infrastructure was not built for the 21st century weather pattern. Record-breaking floods, winter storms in the south, West Coast wildfires, and 120-degree heat domes are pushing systems beyond their limits. Power grids in Texas and California are already under seasonal strain, and blackouts are becoming more common, not less. The Northeast has seen repeated water contamination events. And the worst part? Many of these systems were designed under the assumption of predictable economic cycles, meaning if we were in a booming, fiscally stable era, we could reinvest, but we're not. We're in a high-debt, low-growth, high-interest environment. That means every fix gets delayed, every repair gets value-engineered, every upgrade gets postponed because there's no political or financial will to bite the bullet. This isn't the kind of breakdown that grabs headlines, but it's the kind that makes life worse slowly. It means higher utility bills for degraded service. It means bus routes get cut, maintenance crews get stretched, potholes stay open longer. And eventually, it means that your city starts to feel broken. even if nobody ever declared it collapsed. That's where we are now. The infrastructure isn't exploding, it's decaying in silence. And no one seems to have a plan for what happens when the lights go out and there's no one left to fix them. Trust in the entire system is quietly collapsing. And that's the final domino. At the core of every functioning economy is something deeper than money, deeper than jobs, deeper than even production. It's trust. Trust that your paycheck will come on time. Trust that your bank will honor your deposit. Trust that the government will do the right thing with your tax dollars. Trust that the people running things know what they're doing. And that trust, more than any single statistic, is what's quietly unraveling right now. Because when you pull back from the charts and the press conferences, what you'll see if you're really paying attention is that the foundation of belief in the American economic system is fracturing in real time. The majority of Americans, according to Pew Research, now say they believe the economy is rigged in favor of the wealthy. Gallup's latest data shows trust in institutions, Congress, banks, media. The Federal Reserve is at historic lows. And it's not just sentiment, it's behavior. People are pulling money from traditional banks and moving into money market funds and hard assets at unprecedented rates. We've seen record levels of gold and silver sales to retail buyers. Crypto adoption is still surging despite all the regulatory backlash. Why? Because people are exiting the system, quietly, piece by piece. Even small things like the rise of cash-stuffing budget hacks on TikTok, or the fact that 57% of young Americans now say they would seriously consider living off-grid, are signs that trust is fading, not just in the economy, but in the rules of the game. And this matters more than any number you'll see on CNBC. Because when a population loses trust, you don't get a crash, you get disengagement. People stop voting, stop investing, stop working toward the future. They hunker down, they detach. And an economy without engagement is a machine running on fumes. That's what we're seeing now. The job market's distorted, housing is unaffordable, wages aren't enough, small businesses are fading, infrastructure is crumbling. But the real breaking point is that people no longer believe anything will fix it. And when trust collapses not in a day, not in a panic, but in a slow drip, everything else eventually follows. You won't see that on a Bloomberg ticker, but you'll feel it in the anxious conversations at dinner tables, in the rage on social media, in the quiet decision to keep cash at home, just in case. That's the final stage of economic breakdown. Not loud, not obvious. Just a soft national shrug where everyone starts asking, what's the point? So if it feels like everything is getting harder, it's because it is. Not in a loud, dramatic collapse, but in the quiet erosion of everything that used to feel stable. You're not crazy. You're not lazy. You're living in a system that's slowly failing in real time while the headlines keep telling you everything's fine. The truth is, this economy isn't working for the average American anymore. It's been repurposed to protect wealth at the top while masking the pain at the bottom. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. How long can this slow breakdown continue before something gives? Because this isn't just about money. This is about trust, freedom, independence, and whether or not you'll be ready when the next phase begins. If this connected with you, do one thing right now. Share this video. Someone you know is probably wondering why their life feels harder even though the news says recovery. Help them see it clearly. Make sure you subscribe because in the next video we're going even deeper into the systems no one wants to talk about and what you can actually do about it. Don't wait for the crash. It's already here. You're just living through the quiet part.